Well, I had a question right out of the gate, and it's one that I'm really curious about, but it's this. What would you do if you knew you would never get caught and there would be no consequences? Just imagine something, don't say it out loud like if you're with anybody else, but just think about if you could do something and never get caught with it, like you could get away with it scot-free. Scotch? I don't know. And there would be no consequences, not physical harm, no monetary consequences, no relational shrapnel. Like, you would get away with it, no consequences. What would it be? Think about it. What would you do? You would give everything away to the poor and to charity, right? Yes, thank you. No, you wouldn't do that. You would probably, like some of us super Christians might have said that, might have even thought that, but I bet most of us thought about doing something dangerous. Most of us thought about doing something dangerous or illegal or against the rules or outside of our parents' boundaries, right? Just to see what it would be like, just to try it, maybe just once, because you've always been so darn curious. See, we think these things, and we're probably glad that there are no mind readers around us, right? Because we're thinking these things that we would do or we would want to try, but we're never really going to actually do them, right? And I wonder why. Like, why is that? And I think it's because we are experts at monitoring our behavior so that the good stuff shows on the outside, because that's sort of what dictates our daily experience, what we look like, how we act, what we say, how we present ourselves in person and online, right? But when what's inside of us, it might not be so great. Like what's on the outside looks good. Our behavior, our speech, our social appearance. But what's on the inside, then we might be thinking these terrible things. We might be super judgmental. We might be lusting all the time. We might be this angry person who wants to get revenge on everyone in the most destructive ways. We might think about cheating or lying, gossiping all the time. Now, we might not actually do it, or we might not actually get caught, but we have this inside that's very different from what people see on the outside. Is that you? Is that you tonight? And the answer is yes. And so my question is, to what degree? To what degree is that you tonight, where what's on the outside isn't matching up with what's really going on the inside? What are your real thoughts? What are your real emotions? Oh my God, if people only knew them, right? You know, Solomon, the wisest person to ever live, said in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. You could think of it kind of like a jar of Skittles. Let's just say there's a jar of Skittles, and the Skittles inside the jar are your emotions. They're your feelings, your vibes, right? And you're the jar, okay? You contain all of these emotions. And they're inside of you. The stress, the frustration, the fear, the temptations, the drama, the tendency to gossip, the school, all the weight of your past mistakes, the anger you feel, they're all inside of you. These things, they'll shake the jar. They might even tip the jar. But that's not what determines what comes out of the jar. What's in there, what comes out, has been in there all along, right? What's inside will come out. That's what Solomon is saying in Proverbs 4. What's inside will eventually come out. And let's be honest, for a lot of us, it's not Skittles. It's dog dookie. It's doo-doo. And when doo-doo comes out, what we feel is guilt. When we lash out in anger, when it finally comes out, that anger was inside you all along. It just tipped out a little bit. Something shook the jar. It didn't make you angry. The anger was in there. It just came out. The temptation was in there. Now you acted on it, right? And that's when we feel guilty, because we crossed the line. We went over a boundary. We did something we know we shouldn't do, and it leaves us feeling guilt. I hate feeling guilt. It makes me feel so guilty, right? And you felt it. You know how guilt feels. Maybe big guilt, little guilt. You know how it feels. We've all felt it. And then we say these things to try to justify our guilt and the thing that we did or the thing that we said or whatever. And we say stuff like, well, I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one there. Or we say stuff like, well, people do that all the time. It makes us feel better about ourselves. The thing that people do that all the time. Or I was going through a bad phase at the time. I was in a bad place at the time. That's not me anymore. Or you could say like, it wasn't really my fault. They made me do it. The problem is, while all these things might be true, they don't make us any less guilty. We're still guilty. So it doesn't go away, and guilt sort of works like a weight, I've discovered. It just gets heavier and heavier. It piles on, and it just gets so heavy, eventually it starts to crush us. The jar gets so filled with dookie that it starts to overflow, and it starts to spill out on all the people who are all around us. You told your stepmom, I hate you. And you feel guilty about that, and so now you're in a bad mood when you're around your friends hanging out after school. Maybe you got caught cheating on a test, you're guilty. And now you're silent at the dinner table and your whole family kind of has to suffer because you're feeling the weight of that guilt. It had nothing to do with them. Maybe you went too far with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or you went too far online on your phone. And now you just want to stay in your room and everyone's wondering why you're not the same anymore, but it's because you're feeling this guilt. You're carrying this guilt around for something that you've seen. Maybe it's something that you've said or something that you've done, and people don't even know about it, but because you're carrying that guilt around with you, you're not right. They're not right because it's heavy. And your guilt, your sin, your shame, I want you to hear this tonight, Jesus carried it for you. Jesus carried it for you. He said, don't let it crush you, let it crush me instead. You don't have to carry your heavy chains anymore. These chains that have bound you, that have weighed you down, that have been so heavy, shuck them off, man. I carried them for you when I went to the cross. You are not defined by what you have done. You are defined by what he did. And he came to set you free from guilt and from sin and from shame. He forgave you. He already has forgiven you for everything that you will do. Have you forgiven yourself? Have you forgiven yourself? I think of Paul, the Apostle Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament. He was like the greatest Christian ever, but he had like the worst past ever. You know what I'm saying? Like the stuff, like you think the stuff that you've done is bad. Oh my gosh, this guy killed Christians and then he became one. Imagine the guilt he had to feel all the time unless he gave it to Jesus, unless he surrendered all of that to Jesus. I mean, he had these people who followed Christ, persecuted, sought after, and eliminated, and now he was one of them trying to preach the gospel and spread Christ? Like, oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me. But he writes this in Romans chapter 8, one of my favorite books of the Bible. He says, there is no condemnation, like you are not condemned if you are in Jesus Christ. If you are a Christian, if you put your faith in him, there's no condemnation for you. Why? Because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit who gives life has set you free from the power of sin and death. I'm reminded of this woman who was caught in an affair, having sex with someone other than her husband. It's called adultery, and you can read about it in John chapter 8, verses 9 through 11. And Jesus, he goes to this woman who's guilty. She's caught in adultery. She's carrying the weight of that, and she's about to be, punished for her crime. And Jesus made it clear to all of the people who were accusing this woman that, she's guilty of sin, but you're all guilty of sin. He says, you guys are all guilty. Which one among you is without sin, right? He looked around, and after they had all left because they knew he was right and they couldn't condemn this woman, He says to the woman, where are they now? Where are your accusers now? Has anyone condemned you? And the woman just looks at him and says, no one, Lord. And for a lot of us, we think God is this angry God who's ready to just condemn us every time we sin or we make a mistake or we do something where we feel guilty. But look what Jesus, who is God, look what he did. No one on earth condemned the woman, and she recognized that. No one. And Jesus said, well, then neither do I. That's God. That's God talking. But then he says, go and leave your life of sin. Like, the woman's not just going to be like, well, thanks, Jesus. I'm going to keep on sinning. I'm going to keep on doing everything wrong, everything guilty. I'm going to keep on lashing out. I'm going to keep on being angry. I'm going to keep just acting on all my temptation and doing all of the illegal secret stuff that I'm doing that I know is not God-honoring to you, God, to the people around me, or even myself, right? I'm going to keep on. No, that'd be taking advantage of Jesus and his forgiveness. And if you're doing that, you're not a real Christian, to be honest. But we've got to leave our life of sin. We've got to grow in maturity. We've got to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We have got to be molded daily into the image of Christ, more and more so with each day. And yeah, there's going to be up days and down days. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes. Yeah, you're going to mess up. It's part of it. But not actively taking advantage of that. That's not part of it. You see, Paul continues in Romans chapter 8. And he says, for what the law was powerless to do. Now there was a law. There was this system in place of all these rules and regulations that you had to follow in order to be right or good enough for God, righteous, justified. That was this law, and it couldn't do it. You couldn't follow the laws good enough, perfectly enough to be good enough for God. Why? Because it was weakened by the flesh, right? It said what the law was powerless to do, what it couldn't do, God did. By what? Sending his own son, that's Jesus, in the likeness of a sinful man, of sinful flesh, to be a sin offering. You see, back when there was the old law, whenever you sinned and you messed up, you made a mistake, an animal who was without sin, they don't have the ability to sin, and so they're kind of like perfect morally, would have to die in your place, and the blood of that animal would cover your sin. Then you would go and live your merry life, but you would inevitably sin again because you're a human. And we're messed up. We're sinners. We're fallen. Okay? So then another animal would have to die because you broke one of these rules, one of these laws that were in place. To be right or to be good enough for God, something had to die to cover your mistakes. So it was a broken system. You kept messing up, stuff kept dying. It was never going, there was no end in sight to this. It was just going to continue and continue. That system was in place to show us that we're all doing wrong. We're all sinners. But Jesus, who had no guilt, he took on flesh, the image of man. He came out of heaven and walked among us as a person. But here's the catch. He never sinned. He never did anything wrong. He was perfect. Perfectly God and perfectly man. Is the only one ever in all of history to ever do it. And then what? He died for us. For you and for me, paying the price for all sin, past, present, and future. Nothing has to die anymore to cover sin because he already did it. That's why they call him the Lamb of God. The perfect lamb sacrifice, his blood spilled out, washed over all of us so that we can be forgiven. That's why we don't kill animals in church anymore. Pretty cool. But he literally became guilt for us. He became sin and shame, and he just took it all on himself. He took it all on his shoulders. He took your heavy chains and your mistakes every time you mess up at school, in your family, with your boyfriend, online, wherever, where you talk some crap about somebody behind their back and you regret it deeply. Whatever you do, whatever you say, like it's already been paid for. The guilt was hung on the cross with Jesus. It was paid for when he rose again 3 days later saying, I am God. and I've got you. You believe in me, and the weight of that guilt, let me carry it. It crushed me so it doesn't have to crush you. Is it crushing you today? Because listen, it doesn't have to. You can walk in the freedom that Christ offers. I know it's easier said than done, but because of Jesus, guilt doesn't have to be the boss of you. You don't have to carry it around. I think a lot of us, man, we're forgiven by God, but we haven't forgiven ourselves. Because are we guilty? Yes! No one's arguing that. Yes, we're guilty. Do we mess up? Yes! Daily. We all mess up. I do. You do. We all do. We get it. But look how Paul finishes. Look how Paul finishes. And so he, being God, condemned sin in the flesh through Jesus. He was literally condemned for you. For you. In order that the righteous requirement of the law, doing what the law can never, your good deeds could never be enough, but Jesus was enough. Right? That requirement was met, is met in us through Jesus. Why? Because we don't live according to the flesh. We're not trying to do it on our own. If you're trying to do it on your own, that's why you feel like crap. That's why you carry around the guilt all the time. Because we're living in the flesh. But hey, live according to the Spirit. Man, you got the Holy Spirit inside of you. We said this last week. If you were a Christian, that same power that rose Christ from the grave, that same power that calmed the storm, right? It's in you. It's in you. Are you accessing it? We don't have to let crud spill out of our jar anymore. It can be Skittles inside of us because we have the Spirit inside of us. Let that be what spills out. Man, you guys, like I said, I know it's easier said than done, but we can do this. You can do this. Man, and you can overcome sin. You might think you're caught in something that you can never be free from. Christ came to set you free. You can do it. And we would love to talk with you about how you might do it, because it's not alone, and it's not through the power of it's not on your own doing, the power of the flesh. You as a person, you can't do it. But Christ in you, he can. He can overcome, he can take control of your emotions, whether it's anger, whether it's fear, whether it's guilt, stress, frustration, anxiety. He can work a miraculous wonder in you. He can do it. Now, you may struggle with these things for the rest of your life. But man, the weight of it doesn't have to crush you. The weight of it already crushed him for you. Let's walk in that.